There are only two kinds of servants in the story: faithful and unfaithful, or what Jesus called faithful and foolish. How are you serving God in your everyday life? Would you honestly say that you are faithful, or would you honestly say you're foolish?
Hope and encouragement for life. Hope and encouragement for life. Touching lives.
If you own a business or run a business, or if you are a boss or a supervisor, if you've got anybody that answers to you, if you deal with volunteers, if there's anybody that you have to count on regularly in order to get a job done, then you know how hard it is in this day and age to find people who are truly faithful. Well, a lot of people want a paycheck, but you find those people. But I mean people who are faithful to show up on time, people who will do their job right, people who will give a good day's work for a good day's wage, people who will be faithful to stay until the job is done, even if it's past 5 o'clock, people who are faithful to do what they do without griping or complaining, people who do what they do with a good attitude. Folks, those people are hard to find. The wisest man who ever lived, King Solomon, said this in Proverbs 20: many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find? Solomon said, you know, there are a lot of people out there that talk the talk. They say they're loving, and they say, man, if you hire me, I'll do a good job. If you hire me, you'll be so glad. If you hire me, I'll earn every dime you pay me. They talk the walk till you hire them. But then who can find a faithful man? Hard to come by. When it comes right down to it, every part of our life is dependent on somebody being faithful. For example, a government is dependent on its citizens to obey the law. If you don't believe that, look at what's happening in Egypt, or Bahrain, or Qatar, or what may ignite throughout the entire Middle East. An army is dependent on its soldiers being faithful to carry out their duty. A church is absolutely, completely dependent on you, the people, to be faithful to serve and to give. And every day, our eternal destiny is dependent on God being faithful to His promises. Do you understand, if God ever wakes up and one morning and says, not that He sleeps, but just to use a metaphor, if God ever woke up one morning and said about our salvation, I've changed my mind, we're doomed. The only shot I have of spending eternity with God, He's got to stay faithful to His promise. And that's why the Bible says in Lamentations chapter 3, because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God says, I'm a faithful God. I want you to be faithful. I'm faithful to you. I want you to be faithful to me. And so if you brought a copy of God's Word this morning, I want you to turn to the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew's right after the Old Testament. So go past the Old Testament, you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells a parable, a story, that illustrates the importance of faithfulness. And in this parable, He teaches us one of life's greatest lessons. So let me give you what I call the key takeaway. This is what I want you to walk out the door with this morning. Faithfulness is living up to 5 words in every situation. You can count on me. That's faithfulness. In every situation, you say to the people involved, you can count on me. Now the question is, how do I become a faithful person? How can I bear the fruit of faithfulness? How can people look at me without me ever saying a word and just know that is a faithful person? How do you do that? Well, 3 things. You can write these down. Number 1, take stock of my God-given ability. I need to take stock of my God-given ability. Now look at where the story begins, Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is every person in the parable had been given talents. One person was given 5, one person given 2, one person 1. But here's the important part. Everybody had at least 1. Now, not everybody had been given equal gifts, but everyone had been given gifts equally, and both of those facts are very, very important. See, on the one hand, what makes your abilities, whatever they are, just as important as someone else's, even though they may not be equal to someone else's, are the same. Your abilities, whatever abilities you have, are just as much given from God as somebody else's. Now, sure, some people have more ability than you have. I don't care how good you are, or how good you think you are, or how good you used to be, or how good you think you used to be. Somebody has more ability than you have. Somebody has more talent than you have. Somebody has more gifts than you have. But the important thing I want you to understand is everybody has gifts that are equally God-given, because even though everyone in the parable had been given talents, they had not all been given the same talents. They had been given different talents. And by the way, in this particular parable, even though it talks about money, it obviously represents abilities. He's talking about, gifts and things that we can do, skills. Because he says in verse 15, these talents were given to each according to his ability. So understand now what a talent is. A talent is an opportunity to use your God-given ability for God's glory. That's all a talent is. A talent is an opportunity to use your God-given ability for God's glory. Now, as you're going to see in just a minute, the number of talents, or the amount of talents that each individual had, was really irrelevant. Because the master expected as much from the 1-talent person as he did from the 5-talent person. And he didn't expect any more from the 5-talent person than he did the 1-talent person. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to stop, just take a deep breath. I want you to take stock right now of the abilities that God has given you. Just right now, just start going, what are some things that God has given? What are some gifts I have? What are some skills and abilities that God has given me to do? For example, some of you have the ability to cook. You are fantastic cooks. Some of you have the ability to sing. Now, trust me, some of you don't. But some of you have the ability to sing. Some of you have the ability to sew. Some of you have the ability to play sports. Some of you have the ability to play a musical instrument. Sometimes we get those confused. I told one of our staff members not long ago playing golf, I think you ought to take up the flute. So we all have different gifts. Some of you have the ability to relate to children. You're just great with kids. Some of you have the ability to connect with teenagers. Some of you have the ability just to wave a hand, give a friendly smile, and instantly connect with people. You just got that gift. But here's the principle I want you to understand. It is not how much you have that matters to God. God's not concerned with that. It's what you do with what you have that matters to Him. We don't all have equal abilities. We don't all have equal opportunities to use. We don't all have equal gifts. But what we all have are equal opportunity to use the abilities that we do have to honor God and to bless others. And listen, your opportunities will never exceed your abilities. But on the other hand, your ability will always be equal to your opportunity, always. And what this parable is going to teach us is, even though we all have different abilities, we all have different skills, everybody in this room has the same responsibility to take that opportunity, to use that ability for the good of the God that gave it to us and the good of others who do not. And what is inexcusable, you're going to learn this in the parable, what is absolutely inexcusable to God is for you not to use the talent you've been given. I heard about a guy that got home from work one night and the garage door went up, and his wife was standing there at the door like this, and she was hot. And he said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Do you know what day it is?" He said, "Yeah, it's our 25th wedding anniversary." She said, "Did you buy me a present?" He said, "I sure did." She said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, it's something that took a lot of thought, something that's quite useful, something I think you'll really like." She said, well, what could it be? He said, "I bought you a burial plot in Highland Memorial Park." She said, "You're kidding." He said, "Oh, no." He said, "The cemetery is beautiful. The bronze markers are placed even with the surface of the earth. They keep it perfectly manicured. It's hard to get in there. It's very exclusive. And I just really felt like you deserved the best burial plot money could buy." Well, she kind of softened her up a little bit. She teared up. She, "Well, that is, really thoughtful and sweet. And, and at least you did remember my anniversary." 1 year later, they're sitting at the breakfast table having a cup of coffee. She said, well, you know what today is? He said, sure, it's our 26th wedding anniversary. She said, did you buy me a gift? He said, buy you a gift? You didn't use the one I gave you last year. Now, I love it when people get it in waves. You ever notice that 9:30 it kind of starts from the front, goes to the back. Now here's the question I want to ask you. Serious question. What God-given abilities do you have and you know you have them? Be honest. What God-given abilities do you have and you know you have them? And here's the second question. How are you using the abilities God has given you to serve Him? That's step one. Step two. Take advantage of your God-given opportunity. Take advantage of your God-given opportunity. Now, in order to understand the parable, you've got to understand the symbolism. Every parable has symbolism. And you never understand any parable that Jesus told if you don't understand what represents what, all right? So this is not a real hard parable to understand. Who do you think the master in the parable represents? Somebody tell me, who does it represent? Represents God or Jesus, right? So the parable, the master represents God or Jesus. All right, who do the servants represent? Us. They represent us. So if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're in this parable. So the master represents Jesus, and we are the servants. So the truth of the parable is very evident. What Jesus is saying is, my Father, or I, we've given every one of you gifts. We've given every one of you abilities. And I expect you to leverage those abilities in such a way that I am honored and others are blessed. So let me put it to you this way. Every ability comes with the expectation that that ability will be used when the opportunity presents itself. And every opportunity carries with it a responsibility to use that ability in such a way that God is glorified and others are blessed. Now, there's a reason why Jesus in this parable uses money. There's a reason why he uses money to kind of represent this. Because if you think about it, money really is a good picture of your talents. By the way, the word talent is the Greek word talenton, which gives us the word talented or talents. And Jesus is simply saying, you've got abilities. You've got gifts. You've got talents that my Father has given to you, and you, just like it was money, are to invest those talents. So the story continues. The man who received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, 2 things stand out immediately. One was, even though not everybody had been given equal money or equal talents, everybody had been given the same opportunity to leverage that money, to invest that money, and get a return on that money. Now, the other thing that steps out and really stands out in this story is there are only 2 kinds of servants in the story. Faithful and unfaithful. Or what Jesus called faithful and foolish. So what I want you to do right now, we're going to apply this message as we go along. I want to ask every one of you this question. How are you serving God in this church? How are you serving God where you work? How are you serving God in your everyday life? And as you think about that, I want to ask you a question, real simple. Would you honestly say that you are faithful? Or would you honestly say you're foolish? Would you honestly say that you're leveraging your gifts and you're leveraging your abilities and you're investing your talents? Or would you say they're just buried? Because here's the truth of the matter. You're either doing something for God or you're doing nothing for God. And here's what I want you to know. This is so important. I want to keep hammering this. God did not expect the same results. He didn't expect everybody to get the same return. What he expected was the same effort. And this is something you need to hear. God never compares you with anybody else. God compares you with you. One of my heroes, I've told you before, is Coach John Wooden, who passed away. And Coach Wooden was the UCLA basketball coach, won 11 national championships in 13 years. Let that sink in. Never happen again. 11 national championships in 13 years. He was an unbelievable Christian, a great believer. And by the way, if you like books on leadership, get every book you can read by John Wooden. I've got everyone. I've read them. Unbelievable, tremendous leader. Coach Wooden, in one of his books, tells one of the greatest stories I've ever read in my life. He was a senior on his high school basketball team up in Indiana. They went all the way to the state championship. You know, nothing's bigger in Indiana than basketball, not even in Kentucky. I mean, it's just huge up there. Because at least in Kentucky, they can play football sometime. So, I mean, Indiana, man, basketball is just big up there. They senior year, and they go all the way. It's a little small high school. They go all the way to state champion. They lose by 1 point. And Coach Wooden tells the story. He got to the locker room. Everybody's bawling their eyes out. All the players are crying. The cheerleaders are crying. The coaches are crying. The parents are crying. Everybody's crying. He had to shed a tear. He's not crying. And he said, everybody got upset with me. And he said, finally, one of my teammates came over and said, Wooden, why aren't you crying like everybody else? Do you not care that we lost? And Coach Wooden said, of course I care that we lost. And he said he slammed his fist on the wall, and he said, then why aren't you crying? And Coach Wooden said, because I knew that I played the best game that I could. And that's all God expects out of you. And that's all God expects out of me. I want to tell you something. When you stand before God and I stand before God, He's not going to be looking at anybody else but you. He's not going to be comparing anybody else to you. He's not going to be comparing you to this person, this preacher, that pastor, that salesperson, that homemaker, this homemaker. He's going to look at you. He's going to look at me, and He's going to ask us one question. Did you 24/7 do the best that you could do? Were you faithful? I can't think of a problem in any area of life that cannot be solved if people would just step up and say to the God that made us and to the people that are involved with us, you can count on me to be faithful. Now, this is going to sound very simplistic, but it's true. Any marriage can make it. And we'll say this again real slow. Any marriage can make it if both spouses will stay faithful to their vows and faithful to love each other the way God commands them to love each other. It just comes down to faithfulness. And so here's the last thing to write down. We'll finish. And this is the climax. This is where it all comes down to. Take note of our God-given accountability. Now, the way this story unfolds almost makes me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I mean, this is really classic. Listen to this. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Now, once again, the point's driven home. God is not concerned with what gifts you've been given or how many gifts you have, but what did you do with what I gave you? That's what I'm looking for. What was the return? And that's why both the 5-talent person and the 2-talent person, proportionately speaking, received exactly the same reward. Because God wasn't concerned with who started out with the most talents. All that mattered to God was, what did you do with the talents that I gave you? And yet at the same time, here's what's really strange about this parable. Unlike a lot of parables, it's not really positive, it's really negative. Because the emphasis in the parable is not on the faithful servants. The emphasis on the parable is on the servant that was not faithful. Now notice how he responds. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. Now here's what this person had done. He gets this bag of gold and he comes up with this brilliant creative idea. I'll bury it. I'll just take it out and I'll just bury it. He didn't even have enough initiative to just put it in the bank. Hello. By the way, I found this out in studying for this sermon. Did you know that the Romans had a banking system back in the, listen, this will make you want to go back 2,000 years. They had a banking system, many respects like the banks of today. Do you know what the guaranteed interest on deposit was in a Roman bank? 6%. He doesn't even do that. And Jesus closes this parable like a sledgehammer. Here's what he says. There is no excuse for doing nothing with what you have. No excuse. So we read in verse 26. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the banker so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. Now, I want you to notice what this guy does. This is amazing. He tries to blame the master with his problem. He tries to pass the blame off on his master. He gives this excuse. He says, well, I know what kind of a guy you are. You reap where you don't sow, and you get where you haven't invested. And the master basically said, well, let's just say that what you said is true, that I've gotten everything I've gotten by being deceptive and dishonest. Let's just say you're right. If you thought I would demand a return on what does not belong to me, don't you think I'm going to demand a return on what does belong to me? And the only one of those servants who gave an excuse was the person who did nothing. And I'm going to tell you something. And I'm going to be transparent with all of you. I'm going to be transparent with our staff. Nothing irritates me more, nothing, than when I look at people who show no results, who get nothing done, and then try to blame everybody else. They make excuses. The only people I know in life who make excuses are the people who have nothing to show for their time, nothing to show for their work, but they love to point out why everybody else is the reason. And we have fostered, and you know this, we have fostered that mentality in our society. We're now in a victim society. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always somebody else's problem. It's not, don't blame me. It was my environment. It was my genes. It was my this. It was my that. It's not my responsibility. And it's real interesting that when Jesus asked these two faithful servants, what did you do with your talents? They just simply said, well, we just took the talents and leveraged them and made more talents. That's all they said. But when he asked the unfaithful servant what he did, it took him 42 words to basically say, I did nothing. Oh, he's a good talker. Talk your ears off. And I've learned that's the way it is. The less people do, the more people talk. And the more people talk, the less people do. So I want you to notice something now in verses 21 and 23. Look what he says to these servants. He says, now this is the key to the whole thing. You have been faithful with a few things. Now let me tell you why that's the secret to the whole parable. You ready for this? This will be worth coming to church for, this part right here. If you've been bored up to this point, wake up and hang with me. What's wrong with a lot of people in the church, in your company, in your business, on your football team, in your neighborhood? They think they're too good for the small things. I'm thankful for people who are just faithful. I'm thankful for people who just, without making a big deal out of it, just by the way they live, just by the way they conduct themselves, they look you straight in the eye and they say, you can count on me. So I want to close with this thought and this question. And this is the toughest one of the whole day. But just be honest. And nobody can answer this question but you. And nobody can answer this question for you. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, or you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, here's my question. Would you say that when Jesus Christ came into your life and forgave you of your sins and gave you eternal life, would you say he made a good investment in you? Would you say the way you're living right now and the way you're serving, would you say he's getting a pretty good return on his investment? Now, to put it in perspective, how would you feel if you went to the bank in the morning and you gave them $1,000, said, I want to save my money, and I want you to put this away for me? And I want you to imagine that 10 years later, you go back to get your money and they give you a check for $1,000. And you say, excuse me, but I gave the $10,000, I gave $1,000 10 years ago. I know, there it is. Well, what did you do with it? Oh man, I took care of it. I buried it. You know what? I got this special burial plot right out behind the bank. We even put your name on a plaque on it so nobody would ever bother it, nobody would ever touch it. It's sat there for 10 years, and I'm here to tell you, I'm so proud, nobody's ever touched it 10 years. You didn't even put it in an interest-bearing CD? You didn't even buy a government bond? You buried it? You know what your next words out of your mouth would be? The next words out of your mouth would be, my attorney will be contacting you. Really. You would be absolutely livid. So how do you think God feels when He gives all of us these gifts and these skills and these talents and these abilities straight from His hand, and we just bury them? We just dig a hole and throw them in the dirt. I've received a lot of compliments in my life, most of which I don't deserve. But I will tell you there's one compliment, just one, that would not just make my life, it wouldn't just make my day, it would make my eternity. If I can just stand before my Lord and just one time, I don't have to hear it twice, 3 times, 4 times. If I can just stand before Him one time and hear Him look at me and say, James, well done, good and faithful servant.
To go with God means to grow in goodness. Sooner or later, your season of sin passes by. You can re-walk that old path or start a new one on the path to righteousness. Need some help? Call us. If you go with God, you're good to go. Tasty. Tasty. Flavorful. Having a good taste. Tasty. Living the fruit of the Spirit. Dr. Merritt's sermon series, Tasty. 9 flavorful messages to help you succeed in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Get this remarkable series at a remarkable price. 9 CDs for $40 or 9 DVDs for just $55 at touchinglives.org. Or call 1-800-413-1131. Now, a look at the next Touching Lives.
There's an old hymn that we used to sing when I was a kid growing up. Used to sing it about every other Sunday. It made the list. I don't know how, but it did. It was called I Surrender All. If you really don't want to know what the spirit of gentleness is, it's in those 3 words. You have the spirit of gentleness when you honestly come before God and you say, okay, I surrender everything, everything.
Today's message was all about reliability. We know we can rely on you for your prayers and financial support. You can rely on us to share the good news across the world every week. Thank you for partnering with us.